Story 1. The Midnight Refuel. Marcus Chen had been hauling freight across the Midwest for 17 years, and in all that time he'd developed an ironclad routine. Every Thursday night he'd take the same route from Chicago to Denver, stopping at the same truck stops, eating at the same diners, and refueling at the same stations. Routine was safety. Routine was predictable. But on a cold November night in 2019, Marcus's routine would lead him somewhere that defied every law of nature he'd ever known. The night started normally enough. Marcus had loaded up a shipment of industrial equipment at a warehouse outside Chicago at 6 p.m., signed the manifest, and pulled his Kenworth T680 onto I-80 West as the sun disappeared behind the city skyline. The weather report called for clear skies all the way to Denver, and his GPS estimated arrival at 4 a.m. Friday morning. He had his thermos of black coffee, his CB radio tuned to channel 19, and a playlist of classic rock ready to keep him company through the long haul. By 11:30 p.m., Marcus was making excellent time. He'd crossed into Iowa without issue, maintaining a steady 70 miles per hour through the darkness. The highway was relatively empty, just the occasional cluster of taillights in the distance or the flash of oncoming headlights. His fuel gauge showed just under a quarter tank, which meant it was time for his scheduled refuel stop. According to his GPS, the Flying J truck stop near Des Moines was 18 miles ahead, right on schedule. Marcus had stopped at this particular Flying J dozens of times before. It was a large facility with plenty of parking, clean restrooms, a decent restaurant, and most importantly, fuel pumps that were always operational. He'd even gotten to know some of the night staff over the years, exchanging brief pleasantries while his tank filled. Everything about this stop was familiar, comfortable, expected. The exit came up right where it should have been. Exit 142, the green highway sign illuminated by his headlights exactly as it always appeared. Marcus flipped his turn signal, downshifted, and guided his rig down the off-ramp. The access road curved to the right, leading toward where the bright lights of the truck stop should have been visible against the dark Iowa farmland. But as Marcus rounded the curve, something was wrong. The Flying J wasn't there. Instead, he saw a different truck stop, one he'd never seen before. The sign read, "Crossroads Fuel and Rest" in faded red letters, several of them flickering erratically. The facility was smaller than the Flying J, older, with a design that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. But what struck Marcus most was the lighting. While most modern truck stops blazed with LED floodlights that turned night into artificial day, this place was dimly lit by sodium vapor lamps that cast everything in a sickly orange glow. Marcus's first thought was that he'd taken the wrong exit, but his GPS clearly showed him at exit 142. He'd traveled this route hundreds of times and never seen this crossroads place before. He considered turning around and getting back on the highway, but his fuel situation was getting critical. The next major truck stop was another 40 miles west, and he wasn't confident he'd make it on what remained in his tank. He pulled into the parking lot, which was oddly empty except for 3 other trucks parked in a row near the far end of the facility. All 3 were older models, Peterbilts and Freightliners from what Marcus guessed was the late 80s or early 90s. Their chrome was dulled, their paint faded, but they appeared to be in working condition. No lights were on in any of the cabs, suggesting their drivers were either sleeping or inside the building. Marcus maneuvered his rig up to one of the fuel pumps, noting that the equipment looked ancient. These weren't the modern card reader pumps with digital displays. These were mechanical pumps with spinning number wheels, the kind he remembered from his childhood when his father would stop for gas on family road trips. A handwritten sign taped to the pump read "Prepay Inside," which was odd considering every truck stop he'd been to in the past decade had pay-at-the-pump technology. He shut off his engine, the sudden silence broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and a distant humming sound he couldn't quite identify. The temperature had dropped significantly, his breath forming clouds in the air as he climbed down from the cab. The parking lot was cracked and uneven, with weeds growing through the pavement in several places. The orange sodium lights buzzed and flickered overhead, creating an unsettling strobe effect. The building itself was a low, rectangular structure with large windows that should have offered a clear view of the interior, but they were covered with some kind of film or grime that made it impossible to see inside. A neon sign in one window spelled out Open 24 HRS, but several letters were dead, making it read OPN2 HRS. The front door was made of aluminum and glass, the kind with a pneumatic closer that hissed as it moved. Marcus approached the entrance, his boots crunching on the deteriorating pavement. Everything about this place felt wrong, but he couldn't articulate exactly why. It was more than just the dated appearance or the poor maintenance. There was an atmosphere of wrongness that seemed to hang in the air, a feeling that he was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. He pulled open the door and a small bell chimed above his head. The interior was exactly what he'd expected based on the exterior, outdated and poorly maintained. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, some flickering irregularly. The floor was covered in linoleum that had once been white but was now yellowed and cracked. Metal shelving units held various truck stop merchandise, snacks, drinks, and supplies, but everything looked old. The products had packaging designs he hadn't seen in years, some in styles he vaguely remembered from his youth in the 1990s. Behind the counter stood a man who appeared to be in his 60s, wearing a faded blue work shirt with a name tag that read Earl. He had gray hair, deep wrinkles, and eyes that seemed to look through Marcus rather than at him. He didn't smile or offer any greeting, just stared with an unsettling blankness. "Need to prepay for fuel," Marcus said, his voice sounding strange in the quiet store. "Pump 3, fill up the saddle tanks." Earl continued staring for a moment, then slowly nodded. "Diesel," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. It wasn't a question. "Yes, diesel. How much is it per gallon?" Earl's eyes finally moved, glancing at something Marcus couldn't see behind the counter. $1.12. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Diesel hadn't been that cheap since the early 2000s. He'd paid nearly $3 per gallon at his last fill-up. "That's the price? $1.12? "That's the price," Earl repeated in the same monotone voice. Every instinct Marcus had was screaming at him to leave, to get back in his truck and figure out another way to get fuel. But the rational part of his mind argued that he was being ridiculous. So what if this place was old and the prices were strangely low? Maybe it was some kind of promotional rate, or maybe the owner just hadn't raised prices in a while. Strange, yes, but not impossible. "All right," Marcus said, pulling out his wallet. "I'll give you $200. That should cover it with some extra." He handed over $200 bills from 2019, featuring the standard design with Benjamin Franklin's portrait. Earl took the money, held each bill up to the light, examining them closely with a furrowed brow. He seemed confused by them, turning them over several times as if he'd never seen currency quite like this before. "These are hundreds," Marcus said. "Legal tender. Is there a problem?" Earl set the bills on the counter, then opened the register. The drawer was filled with money, but as Marcus glanced at it, he noticed something odd about the bills. They looked slightly different, though he couldn't immediately place why. Earl counted out change, handing Marcus back a stack of 20s, 10s, 5s, and 1s. Marcus accepted the change, glancing down at the bills. His blood went cold. The currency in his hand was definitely United States dollars, but they were wrong. The design was older, much older. The $20 bills showed Andrew Jackson, but the portrait style and security features were from decades ago. The serial numbers started with series indicators he hadn't seen since he was a child. He looked more carefully and felt his chest tighten. These bills were dated 1988, 1989, 1991. None of them were from anything close to the current decade. "What year is it?" Marcus asked suddenly, his voice coming out more forcefully than he intended. Earl's expression didn't change. 1993, he said simply. "No," Marcus said, shaking his head. "No, it's 2019, November 2019. Earl just stared at him with those blank eyes, offering no response, no argument, no acknowledgement of the discrepancy. Marcus looked around the store again, this time paying attention to details he'd missed before. A calendar on the wall showed November 1993. A newspaper on the counter was dated November 18, 1993, with headlines about events Marcus vaguely remembered learning about in history class or hearing about from older relatives. A television mounted in the corner was playing what looked like a commercial, but the production quality was distinctly early 90s, featuring products and technology from that era. "This isn't possible," Marcus whispered. He looked down at the money in his hand again, then at his own wallet, which still contained several bills dated 2019 and 2018. He pulled out his phone, a modern smartphone with full touchscreen and high-definition display. The screen showed no signal, which wasn't entirely surprising in rural Iowa, but more importantly, it showed the date, November 21st, 2019, Thursday, 11:47 p.m. "Pump 3 is on," Earl said, apparently unbothered by Marcus's distress. "You can fuel up." Marcus stumbled backward toward the door, his mind racing. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank, or maybe he'd fallen asleep at the wheel and was dreaming. But everything felt too real, too detailed, too consistent. The smell of the place, the temperature, the sounds, all of it was exactly as it should be for a physical location. He pushed through the door and nearly ran to his truck. The familiar bulk of his Kenworth T680, with its modern aerodynamic design and LED lights, looked impossibly out of place in this environment. It was like seeing a spacecraft parked at a covered wagon rest stop. He climbed into the cab, his hands shaking as he grabbed his logbook, his phone, his various documents. Everything he had confirmed the date. November 21st, 2019. Marcus looked at the other 3 trucks parked across the lot. Now that he was paying attention, he could see they were models from the late 80s and early 90s. A 1987 Peterbilt 379, a 1989 Freightliner FLD 120, a 1991 Kenworth W900, and none of them showed any signs of aging that should have occurred over nearly 30 years. They looked like they'd been driven recently, like they'd been manufactured recently. He needed to fuel up. There was no way around it. His gauge was showing less than an eighth of a tank now, and whether this place was in 1993 or 2019 or some impossible space between, his truck needed diesel. Marcus climbed down again, forcing himself to move to the pump. His hands fumbled with the nozzle, and he nearly dropped it before managing to fit it into his fuel tank opening. The pump activated with a mechanical clunk, and diesel began flowing. Marcus watched the spinning number wheels click upward, counting the gallons in a hypnotic rhythm. 1 gallon, 2 gallons, 5, 10. The mechanism was completely analog, no digital displays, no electronic chirps, just the steady click-click-click of mechanical counters. As he stood there, Marcus became aware of the humming sound he'd noticed earlier. It was louder now, or maybe he was just paying more attention to it. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a low-frequency vibration that he could feel in his chest as much as hear with his ears. The sodium lights overhead continued their irregular flickering. And in those moments of dimness, the shadows around the parking lot seemed to move in ways that didn't quite match what should have been casting them. Movement caught his eye. A figure had emerged from one of the parked trucks, the 1989 Freightliner. It was a man wearing jeans and a denim jacket, walking toward the building with a casual gait that suggested routine familiarity. He looked to be in his 40s with a mustache and hairstyle that matched the 1993 aesthetic. As he passed under one of the lights, Marcus could see him clearly. A normal-looking trucker, completely at ease in this environment. The man glanced toward Marcus, made brief eye contact, and nodded in the universal trucker greeting. Marcus automatically nodded back, his social conditioning overriding his confusion and fear. The man continued into the building, the bell chiming as he entered. Marcus's saddle tanks were large, and at this rate of flow, he estimated it would take another 5 minutes to fill them completely. He considered stopping the pump early and leaving with whatever fuel he had. But something compelled him to wait, to fill the tanks completely. Maybe it was the ingrained efficiency of a professional trucker who knew that every gallon mattered. Or maybe it was a deeper instinct that told him he might not get another chance to refuel before something terrible happened. The pump clicked off automatically when the tanks were full. The counter showed 287 gallons, which was exactly right for his tank capacity. The price showed $321.44. Marcus had prepaid $200, which meant he was short by a significant amount. But that was impossible. At $1.12 per gallon, $200 should have bought him nearly 179 gallons. And he'd pumped 287. The math didn't work unless the price wasn't actually $1.12, or unless something very strange was happening with currency conversion between different time periods. Marcus replaced the nozzle and walked back to the building, his sense of unreality deepening with each step. Inside, the man from the Freightliner was standing at the counter, chatting with Earl about routes and weather, their conversation perfectly mundane except for the references to roads and conditions that Marcus knew had changed dramatically in the past 26 years. "I need to settle up on pump 3, Marcus interrupted, his voice tight. Earl looked at him with those blank eyes. "You gave 200. Pump shows 321.44. You owe 121.44. Marcus pulled out more of the strange old currency Earl had given him as change earlier, counting out $122. The other trucker watched this transaction with mild interest, his eyes moving from Marcus's modern clothing to his digital watch to the smartphone visible in his shirt pocket. "You're not from around here," the man said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," Marcus agreed. "I'm not from here at all." "Long way from home?" "Further than you could possibly imagine." The man seemed to accept this cryptic answer, nodding sagely. "Roads can take you strange places if you're not careful. Sometimes you think you're heading west and you end up somewhere else entirely." He tipped his cap to Marcus and Earl, then headed toward the door. "Safe travels," he called back. Marcus stood at the counter looking at Earl, trying to formulate the questions spinning through his mind. "How do I get back?" he finally asked. "How do I get back to 2019? Earl's expression remained unchanged. "Same way you got here. Drive." "That's not an answer. That doesn't help me." "Drive east. Don't stop. Don't look back. Stay on the highway. The road will take you where you need to go if you don't fight it." "What is this place? How is this possible?" "Crossroads," Earl said, gesturing vaguely around him. "Some places exist between things. Between times, between spaces, between what is and what was. Drivers like you, sometimes you slip through the cracks, especially on long hauls when you're tired, when your mind wanders, when you're not paying attention. You went somewhere else for a while. Now you need to go back." Marcus wanted to argue, to demand better explanations, to insist on rational answers to impossible questions. But he could see in Earl's eyes that there was nothing more to be gained here. This was the explanation he was going to get, and spending more time in this place wasn't going to make things clearer. He walked back to his truck, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. The familiar rumble of the diesel motor was enormously comforting. a connection to reality and normalcy. He put the truck in gear and navigated back toward the access road, following the signs that should lead back to I-80. As he drove away from Crossroads Fuel and Rest, Marcus looked in his side mirrors. The truck stop was visible with its orange sodium lights and faded sign, but as he rounded a curve in the access road, he glanced back again and it was gone. Not just out of sight, but completely absent, as if the entire facility had simply ceased to exist. The on-ramp appeared ahead and Marcus merged back onto I-80. But instead of heading west as he'd intended, he followed Earl's instruction and turned east, back the way he'd come. His GPS immediately began protesting, recalculating the route, showing confused errors as it tried to understand why he'd reversed direction. Marcus drove through the darkness, maintaining exactly the speed limit, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. The CB radio was silent. His phone showed no signal. He passed no other vehicles for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 or 20 minutes. Then gradually, things began to change. First, his phone signal returned, showing full bars. The CB radio crackled to life with fragments of conversations from other truckers. His GPS stopped showing errors and recalculated his position. And when Marcus looked at the dashboard clock, it showed 12:03 a.m., Friday morning, November 22, 2019. He'd been gone for only 16 minutes, even though it had felt much longer. Marcus took the next exit, not caring that it wasn't his planned route, and pulled into a well-lit Modern Love's truck stop. He parked, turned off the engine, and sat in the cab with his hands shaking, his heart pounding. After several minutes, he climbed down and checked his fuel tanks. They were completely full, exactly as they should be after the fill-up at Crossroads. He went inside the Loves needing to see normal people, normal products, normal everything. The bright LED lights, the modern point-of-sale system, the current magazines and newspapers, all of it was beautiful in its absolute mundane ordinariness. He bought a cup of coffee from a machine with a digital touchscreen, paid with his credit card using a chip reader, and received a printed receipt dated November 22, 2019 at 12:11 a.m. Marcus sat in the truck stop's driver lounge for 2 hours, drinking coffee, watching late-night television, and slowly convincing himself that he wasn't losing his mind. Eventually, he returned to his truck and continued his route to Denver, arriving several hours late but otherwise incident-free. He never spoke to anyone about what happened that night. His logbook showed a normal stop for fuel at approximately midnight, with nothing unusual noted. His fuel receipts showed a purchase at a Love's truck stop, with no record of any place called Crossroads Fuel and Rest. Even the strange old currency he'd received as change had vanished from his wallet, replaced by normal bills dated from the current decade. But Marcus never took exit 142 near Des Moines again. He changed his route to avoid that stretch of I-80 entirely, adding an extra hour to his Chicago-Denver runs. And sometimes late at night when he was driving through darkness on empty highways, he would think about Earl's words about places that exist between things, and he would grip his steering wheel a little tighter, keeping his attention focused entirely on the present moment, terrified of slipping through the cracks again into a time and place where he didn't belong. Story 2. The Phantom Convoy. Denise Rodriguez had been driving long-haul for 12 years, specializing in refrigerated cargo runs up and down the eastern seaboard. She'd hauled everything from produce to pharmaceuticals, maintaining a spotless safety record and a reputation for reliability that kept the contracts coming. At 38 years old, she knew the I-95 corridor from Maine to Florida like the back of her hand, could predict traffic patterns with uncanny accuracy, and prided herself on her professionalism and composure under pressure. On a rainy March night in 2021, Denise was hauling a refrigerated load of seafood from Portsmouth, New Hampshire to a distribution center outside Baltimore. The route was familiar, the weather was manageable, and she expected to arrive by dawn Saturday morning. She'd departed Portsmouth at 8 p.m. Friday, made excellent time through Massachusetts and Connecticut, and by 1:30 a.m. was passing through the northern reaches of New Jersey. The rain had intensified into a steady downpour, the kind that reduced visibility and made the highway reflective and dangerous. Denise had slowed to 60 miles per hour, keeping extra distance between herself and the sparse traffic around her. Her reefer unit hummed behind the cab, maintaining the cargo at exactly 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything was routine, controlled, professional. As she approached the New Jersey-Pennsylvania border, Denise noticed another truck appear in her mirrors, coming up behind her at a slightly faster pace. It was an older Peterbilt 389 painted dark blue or black, difficult to tell exactly in the rain and darkness. The truck moved into the left lane to pass her, and as it drew alongside, Denise could see the driver briefly, a silhouette of a man wearing what looked like a baseball cap. The Peterbilt completed its pass and moved back into the right lane ahead of her. Denise thought nothing of it, just another driver making better time in difficult conditions. But then a second truck appeared, another older model, this one looking like a late-model Freightliner classic. It passed her in the same manner, pulling into position ahead of her, maintaining formation behind the Peterbilt. Then a third truck appeared, and a fourth, and a fifth. Within 10 minutes, Denise found herself following behind what appeared to be a convoy of 7 trucks, all maintaining precise spacing, all older models from what she could see through the rain, all moving at exactly 62 miles per hour. They were spaced evenly, perhaps 200 feet between each vehicle, moving with a coordination that suggested either CB communication or professional drivers who knew how to run together. Denise reached for her CB radio and switched to Channel 19, the standard channel truckers used for road communication. "This is Denise southbound on I-95 at mile marker 47. Got a convoy of 7 trucks running ahead of me. Y'all coordinating on a different channel, or can I join the party?" Static was her only answer. She adjusted the squelch, checked her connections, and tried again. "Breaker 19, this is Denise in the refrigerated Volvo. Anyone out there?" More static, but this time, underneath it, she thought she heard something. Voices maybe, but distant and distorted, as if coming through from very far away or through some kind of interference. She adjusted the channel, scanning through others, but found only more static with those same strange, distant voices underneath. The convoy ahead of her maintained its formation, none of the trucks deviating from their precise spacing or speed. Denise checked her speedometer and confirmed she was still doing exactly 60 miles per hour, which meant she should gradually be falling behind the faster convoy. But she wasn't. Despite the speed differential, the distance between her truck and the last vehicle in the convoy remained constant, as if she were somehow locked into their formation despite traveling at a different velocity. That didn't make sense. That defied basic physics. If they were going 62 and she was going 60, they should be pulling away from her at a rate of 2 miles per hour, or about 176 feet per minute. After 10 minutes, they should be nearly a third of a mile ahead. But they weren't. They were exactly where they'd been, maintaining that same 200-foot spacing, the last truck in the convoy hanging in her vision like it was tied to her by an invisible rope. Denise accelerated slightly, bringing her speed up to 62 to match the convoy. She should have begun closing the distance to match their formation properly, but instead, the gap remained identical. She accelerated further, pushing to 65, her wipers working overtime to clear the rain. The convoy stayed exactly the same distance ahead. A cold feeling began spreading through Denise's chest. She'd been driving long enough to know when something was wrong, when the world wasn't behaving the way it should. She'd experienced mechanical failures, weather emergencies, even a carjacking attempt once at a rest stop. But this was different. This was reality itself seeming to malfunction. She eased off the accelerator, dropping her speed back to 60. The convoy maintained its position. She slowed further, down to 55, then 50. The convoy remained exactly where it had been, unchanging. The spacing between each truck and between the last truck and Denise's own vehicle staying perfectly constant regardless of her speed. The rain was getting worse, the downpour so intense now that her wipers could barely keep up even on their highest setting. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the convoy ahead in stark white, light for brief moments. In those flashes, Denise could see the trucks more clearly, and what she saw made her stomach tighten. The trucks weren't just old models. They were deteriorating. The Peterbilt in the lead had visible rust on its hood and fenders. The Freightliner behind it had cracked and fading paint. Each truck in the convoy showed signs of age and neglect, yet they moved smoothly, their engines apparently running fine, their lights all functioning. Another lightning flash, and this time Denise saw something that made her gasp. The second truck in the convoy, the Freightliner, had no rear door on its trailer. The interior was completely visible, empty except for what looked like chains hanging from the ceiling. And for just a moment, in the stark illumination of the lightning, Denise thought she saw figures standing in that trailer. Human shapes that couldn't possibly be there because no one could stand upright in a moving trailer at highway speed. She grabbed her phone, intending to call 911 to report something, though she didn't know what. But her phone showed no signal, 0 bars, which was unusual for I-95, especially this close to major population centers. She tried anyway, but the call wouldn't connect, just an error message about being unable to complete the call at this time. The CB radio crackled suddenly, and through the static she heard a voice. It was male, rough, as if coming through an old or damaged speaker. "Convoy, moving south. Anyone copy?" Denise grabbed the microphone. "Yes, I copy. This is Denise Rodriguez. I'm following behind what appears to be your convoy. What's your status?" Static, then the voice again, clearer this time but somehow wrong. The cadence odd, the tone strange. "Maintaining formation. Destination ahead. Stay in line." "What destination? Where are you heading?" "Where we've always been heading. Where we'll always be heading. Stay in line." The voice faded back into static. Denise tried several more times to raise them but got no response. She looked ahead at the convoy, her mind racing. Every instinct told her to break away, to change lanes, to take the next exit, to get as far from these trucks as possible. But when she tried to move into the left lane, her steering felt sluggish, resistant, as if the truck didn't want to leave its current path. She forced the wheel harder, and her Volvo began to drift left. But as it did, the convoy ahead shifted as well. The entire formation moving left in perfect unison, maintaining their spacing and their position relative to Denise. She straightened out, and the convoy straightened out. She tried to drift right toward the exit lane, and the convoy drifted right. "Oh God," Denise whispered. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." She was trapped. Somehow, impossibly, she was locked into formation with this phantom convoy, unable to break away, unable to change her course. The trucks ahead of her controlled her movement, or something about their presence had created a field or force that prevented her from deviating. The rain continued its assault, and the highway began to look wrong. The signs they passed were weathered, faded, some of them listing to one side or covered in vines and vegetation as if they hadn't been maintained in years. The road surface became rougher, potholes appearing that Denise felt her truck jar over, though the convoy ahead seemed to glide over the same rough patches without any visible disturbance. Mile markers passed, but they were out of sequence. She saw mile marker 45, then 43, then 47, then 41. They appeared in random order, the numbers making no logical sense. Her GPS had stopped showing her position entirely. Just a blank screen with an error message about being unable to acquire satellite signal. Time became strange. Denise looked at her dashboard clock and saw 2:15 a.m. She glanced down at her logbook to make a note, and when she looked back up, her clock showed 2:03 a.m. Time was running backward, or running in circles, or simply breaking down into meaninglessness. The convoy ahead maintained its formation, tireless, unchanging, locked into an eternal journey that might have started years or decades ago and might continue forever. Denise realized with horror that she might have become part of it, might now be the eighth truck in a phantom procession that existed outside of normal time and space, doomed to drive forever on a highway that led nowhere. She tried everything. She attempted to force the steering wheel hard to the right, to drive onto the shoulder. The wheel resisted, but she pushed harder, using all her strength. Her truck began to angle toward the shoulder, the rumble strips beginning to vibrate under her wheels. But as she did, the entire convoy shifted right, and more than that, the shoulder itself seemed to move, staying always just out of reach, as if the road was repositioning itself to prevent her escape. She tried slamming on the brakes, hoping to drop far enough behind the convoy to break whatever connection existed. But when she hit the brakes, her truck slowed only marginally, and the convoy slowed with her, maintaining exact formation. When she realized that continuing to brake was only going to bring all of them to a halt. Without breaking the connection, she accelerated again. Lightning flashed, and in its light Denise saw that the lead truck, the Peterbilt, no longer had a driver. The cab was empty, the seat vacant, the steering wheel turning on its own. A second flash showed her the second truck, also driverless. A third flash revealed the terrible truth. All 7 trucks ahead of her were empty, ghost vehicles driving themselves, guided by no human hand. The CB radio burst to life again, but this time multiple voices came through, overlapping, all of them with that same wrong quality, that sense of being not quite human or not quite alive. Been driving for so long. Can't remember when we started. Where are we going? I want to stop. Can't stop. Never stop. Join us. Become part of the convoy. Drive forever. Denise was crying now, tears streaming down her face, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. She was a rational person, a professional, someone who dealt with problems through logic and procedure. But there was no logic here, no procedure that could help her. She was trapped in a nightmare that defied every rule of reality she'd ever known. An exit sign appeared ahead. Next right, 1 mile. It was the first sign in what felt like an hour that had seemed normal, legible, properly maintained. Denise focused on it like a lifeline. 1 mile. She could make 1 mile. She could reach that exit. But as they approached, the exit sign began to fade, the letters becoming dim, then translucent, then invisible. The exit ramp itself, briefly visible in the distance, wavered like a mirage and vanished. The highway continued straight ahead with no exit, no escape, nothing but more rain-slicked pavement disappearing into darkness. "Please," Denise sobbed, "please let me go. I don't want to be here. I want to go home." The voices on the CB responded, a chorus of desperate pleas that might have been her own voice or might have been the voices of other drivers who'd been trapped before her. "Home. Want to go home, can't find home. Home doesn't exist anymore, darling. Only the road, only the convoy, only the endless driving." Denise closed her eyes, unable to bear looking at the highway anymore, unable to watch her doom approaching second by second. She prayed, something she hadn't done since childhood, praying to any god or force that might be listening, begging for release, for escape, for salvation. Her truck jarred suddenly, hitting something hard. Her eyes snapped open. She drifted onto the rumble strips, but these were real rumble strips, not the phantom ones from before. And ahead of her, the convoy was fading, the trucks becoming translucent, ghostly, see-through. She could see the highway beyond them, could see real taillights from a real vehicle far ahead. Denise yanked the wheel hard right, not caring about the roughness of the shoulder, not caring about anything except getting away from the disappearing convoy. Her truck fishtailed slightly on the wet shoulder, but she controlled it, bringing it to a safe stop on the grass beyond the paved shoulder. The convoy continued on the highway, the 7 trucks now barely visible like images projected on smoke. As Denise watched, they faded completely, vanishing into the rain and darkness as if they'd never existed. She sat in her stopped truck, engine idling, hazard lights flashing, her entire body shaking. Her clock showed 2:47 a.m. Her GPS suddenly activated, showing her position clearly on I-95 in New Jersey, exactly where she should be. Her CB radio crackled with normal trucker chatter, people discussing weather and traffic and rest stop locations in normal human voices. Denise grabbed her phone and was flooded with relief when she saw full signal bars. She dialed the company's emergency line, and a dispatcher answered immediately. "Rodriguez, what's your status? We lost your tracking signal for over an hour." I had to stop. Weather's bad. I needed to pull over." "Copy that. Your reefer unit data also went offline. Everything okay with the equipment?" Denise checked her systems. Everything showed green, normal, functioning perfectly. All systems normal. Must have been some kind of signal interference. "Well, you're back online now. Take whatever time you need with the weather, safety first." She ended the call and sat in silence, listening to the rain on her cab roof, watching normal traffic pass on the highway. After 20 minutes, she felt stable enough to continue. She pulled back onto I-95, merged into traffic, and continued her route to Baltimore. The rest of the journey was completely normal. The weather cleared. Traffic was light. She arrived at the distribution center at 6:15 a.m., delivered her cargo, and completed all her paperwork. Everything was routine, professional, exactly as it should be. But Denise quit long-haul trucking 3 weeks later. She told her company she wanted to focus on local deliveries, day shifts only, routes that would let her be home every night. She told her family she was tired of the road, that she wanted more work-life balance. She told her friends she'd simply burned out after 12 years of long hauls. She never told anyone the real reason, that on a rainy March night, she'd fallen into formation with the Phantom Convoy, had been trapped with the ghost trucks that drove forever on highways that existed between moments, and that every time she closed her eyes, she could still see those empty cabs and still hear those desperate voices pleading over the CB radio. She never wanted to risk encountering them again, never wanted to take the chance that next time she wouldn't be able to break free. That next time she would become permanently part of the convoy, driving forever on roads that led nowhere. Another ghost truck in an endless procession through darkness and rain. Story 3. The truck stop that wasn't there. James Peterson was a third-generation trucker following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather before him. At 44 years old, he'd been driving commercially for 23 years, primarily hauling construction materials and heavy equipment across the western states. He knew the mountain passes, the desert highways, and the long stretches of nothing that characterized routes through Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas. On a cold February night in 2020, James was hauling a load of steel beams from Billings, Montana to Salt Lake City, Utah. The route took him south on I-90, then west on I-15, through some of the most desolate terrain in the continental United States. This was big sky country, places where you could drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle, where the stars were so bright they cast shadows, and where the wind could blow your truck sideways if you weren't careful. James had departed Billings at 4 p.m., hoping to make Salt Lake by dawn. The weather forecast was clear and the roads were in good condition. His Peterbilt 579 was running perfectly. The load was properly secured, and he had a full tank of fuel and a thermos of coffee to keep him company through the long night ahead. By 10 p.m., James was making excellent progress, somewhere in the empty spaces between towns with names like Dillon and Lima, tiny communities that existed more as dots on maps than actual populations. The highway stretched ahead like a ribbon of black through darker landscape, illuminated only by his headlights and the pale glow of a half-moon. The only signs of civilization were the occasional cluster of lights in the distance marking a ranch or small settlement. His fuel gauge showed just over a quarter tank, which was fine for now but would need attention within the next hour or two. James knew there was a major truck stop near Idaho Falls, still about 90 miles ahead. That's where he'd planned to refuel, grab some food, and maybe take a short break before the final push to Salt Lake. But as he crested a rise in the highway, James saw lights ahead much sooner than expected. They were the distinctive glow of a large truck stop, bright islands of illumination in the surrounding darkness. According to his GPS, he was still 70 miles from Idaho Falls, and there weren't supposed to be any major facilities in this area. Maybe a small gas station or convenience store, but nothing like the spread of lights he was seeing. As he drew closer, the truck stop resolved into a massive facility, larger than most he'd seen in major cities. The sign read, Mountain West Travel Plaza in huge backlit letters. The parking lot was extensive with spaces for easily 100 trucks, multiple fuel islands with at least 20 pumps. A large building that appeared to house a restaurant, store, and other amenities. The entire complex was blazing with light, a beacon of civilization in the empty darkness. James felt both confused and relieved. Confused because he'd driven this route dozens of times and never seen this place before, and relieved because his fuel situation was getting tighter than he'd anticipated, and finding a place to refuel 70 miles earlier than expected was welcome news. He took the exit, which appeared suddenly, the ramp well-maintained and clearly marked. As he descended toward the truck stop, he noticed there were quite a few trucks parked in the lot, maybe 30 or 40 vehicles. All appeared to be modern rigs, Kenworths, Peterbilts, Volvos, Freightliners, the kinds of trucks you'd see at any major truck stop in America. James pulled up to one of the fuel islands and shut off his engine. The quiet after hours of road noise was profound, broken only by the sound of wind and the distant hum of generators or refrigeration units. The temperature had dropped significantly, his breath fogging in the air as he climbed down from the cab. The fuel pumps were modern, with digital displays and card readers. James swiped his company fuel card and began filling his tanks. As the diesel flowed, he looked around the facility more carefully. Everything appeared normal, well-maintained, professionally operated. The building had large glass windows through which he could see people moving around inside, drivers eating, shopping, using the facilities. But something felt off, though James couldn't immediately identify what. It was a subtle wrongness, a discordant note in an otherwise ordinary scene. He finished fueling, replaced the nozzle, and collected his receipt from the pump. The paper showed all the expected information: gallons purchased, price per gallon, total cost, date, time. Nothing unusual. James decided to go inside, both to verify the charge had processed correctly and to grab some food. He walked toward the building, his boots crunching on the clean pavement. The parking lot was well lit, the stripes freshly painted, everything in good condition. Other trucks were parked in neat rows, their chrome gleaming under the lights. As he approached the entrance, James passed another driver heading out. The man was wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and a baseball cap, looking like any other trucker. They made brief eye contact and exchanged nods. But something about the man's eyes stuck with James. They'd been strangely flat, lifeless, as if the person behind them wasn't entirely there. James pushed through the glass doors into the facility. The interior was exactly what you'd expect. Bright fluorescent lighting, aisles of snacks and trucking supplies, coolers full of drinks, hot food service areas, seating areas, and hallways leading to restrooms and showers. Soft rock music played over speakers. Everything was clean, modern, and professional. There were people inside, maybe a dozen drivers scattered around the facility. Some were eating, some were shopping, some were just sitting in the lounge area, staring at a television on the wall. James approached the counter where a clerk was standing, a young woman in her 20s wearing a polo shirt with the Mountain West Travel Plaza logo. "Evening," James said. "Just wanted to verify that my fuel charge went through okay. Had a card reader hiccup recently at another stop, want to make sure it processed." The clerk smiled, but like the man outside, her expression seemed somehow hollow. "I can check that for you. Do you have your receipt?" James handed over the fuel receipt. The clerk looked at it, then typed something into her computer. She frowned slightly, typed more, then looked up at James with that same empty smile. "Everything looks fine, sir. The charge processed correctly. Is there anything else I can help you with?" "Yeah, actually. I've driven this route a lot and I don't remember seeing this truck stop before. When did you open?" The clerk's smile didn't waver. "We've been here a long time. Maybe you just never needed to stop before." "No, I've driven past this exact area dozens of times. This is new." "We've been here a long time," she repeated, using exactly the same words with exactly the same inflection, as if she were a recording rather than a person. James felt the wrongness intensify. He looked around the facility again, paying more attention to details. The other drivers in the building weren't interacting with each other. They were sitting or standing alone, moving in isolation, not making eye contact, not speaking. The television on the wall was on, showing what appeared to be a news broadcast, but there was no sound, and the images seemed to repeat in a loop, the same shots cycling over and over. The products on the shelves looked normal at first glance, but when James looked closer, he realized the packages were all generic. No actual brand names, just descriptions like potato chips or candy bar or soda. The drinks in the coolers were similar, bottles and cans with labels that said cola or water, but no actual company branding. "I think I'll just use the restroom and then get back on the road," James said, backing away from the counter. "Of course," the clerk said with that unsettling smile. "The restrooms are down that hallway to your right." James walked toward the indicated hallway, his sense of wrongness growing with every step. The hallway was clean and well lit, with signs directing to men, women, and showers. He pushed through the door marked men and found himself in a large modern restroom with multiple stalls and sinks. He was alone in the restroom, which was a relief. James went to one of the sinks and splashed cold water on his face, trying to center himself, trying to think clearly. He looked at his reflection in the mirror and saw himself looking tired and stressed, exactly as he should look after 6 hours of driving through the night. But then he noticed something in the mirror that made his blood run cold. Behind him in the reflection, one of the stall doors was open, and inside the stall he could see someone standing there, facing the back wall, completely motionless. It was another driver, visible from the shoulders up over the stall divider, wearing a flannel shirt and cap. James spun around, but the stalls were all closed. He could see under the dividers that they were empty. He looked back at the mirror, and the figure was still there, standing motionless in the open stall, visible only in the reflection. "Oh, God," James whispered. He bolted from the restroom, nearly running down the hallway back into the main area of the truck stop. The other drivers in the facility had all stopped what they were doing and were now standing completely still, all of them facing in James's direction, all of them wearing the same empty expression. James ran for the exit, pushing through the doors back into the parking lot. He sprinted toward his truck, his heart hammering, his breath coming in gasps. Behind him, he could hear the doors of the facility open, and when he glanced back, he saw the drivers coming out, all of them moving in unison, all of them walking toward his truck with that same terrible blankness in their eyes. James reached his Peterbilt, yanked open the door, and hauled himself into the cab. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition, but he finally managed it and fired up the engine. He didn't bother with seatbelts or careful maneuvering. He put the truck in gear and accelerated hard, pulling away from the fuel island and heading toward the exit. The other drivers didn't run after him or even speed up. They just kept walking, following his truck at a steady, unhurried pace, as if they had all the time in the world, as if they knew he couldn't actually escape. James navigated through the parking lot toward the exit that would lead back to the highway. But as he approached where the exit ramp should be, he saw only the entrance ramp he'd come down. The exit ramp was gone, or had never existed. He drove around the perimeter of the truck stop, searching frantically for another way out. But there was none. The facility was surrounded by darkness, and every route that looked like it might lead back to the highway simply curved back toward the truck stop itself. He was trapped. The parking lot had become a loop, a closed system that circled back on itself. No matter which direction James drove, he ended up back at the same fuel islands, the same building, the same blank-faced drivers who were now standing in a group near the entrance watching him drive in circles. James grabbed his CB radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is James Peterson driving a Peterbilt 579 with Montana plates. I'm trapped at a truck stop somewhere south of Dillon, Montana. If anyone can hear me, I need help." Static answered him, but underneath it, he thought he could hear something else. A voice, or many voices, whispering words he couldn't quite make out. He tried his cell phone, but it showed no signal. He tried his company's tracking system, but it displayed an error, unable to determine his location. Every system that should connect him to the outside world was dead or non-functional. James drove around the perimeter again, this time pushing his speed, hoping momentum or determination could somehow break whatever force was keeping him trapped. But the road kept curving back, the parking lot kept recycling, and the darkness beyond, the lights remained impenetrable. He noticed that the parked trucks in the lot were the same vehicles he'd seen when he first arrived, but now they all looked abandoned, their cabs dark, no signs of life, and in the windows of some of them he could see figures sitting in the driver's seats, motionless silhouettes that might have been people or might have been something else. The group of drivers near the building entrance was growing. More figures were emerging from the facility, all of them joining the group, all of them standing and watching James's desperate circles. There were dozens of them now, maybe 50 or 60, all silent, all waiting. James realized that if he stopped, they would reach him. Whatever these things were, whatever this place was, if he let his truck come to rest, they would surround him, would open his doors, would pull him out into their ranks, and he would become one of them. Another blank-faced figure standing forever in this impossible truck stop that existed nowhere and everywhere at once. So he kept driving, around and around the parking lot, watching his fuel gauge slowly drop, knowing that eventually he would run out of diesel and would be forced to stop. He could hear the voices more clearly now through the CB static, and they were calling his name, telling him to stop, to rest, to join them, that he was so tired that he could finally stop driving forever. Hours passed, or what felt like hours. Time had no meaning in this place. James's eyes were burning, his hands cramped on the wheel, his body exhausted from the adrenaline and terror. The fuel gauge showed 1/8 of a tank, then a 1/16. Then the low fuel warning light came on. "Please," James said to no one and everyone, "please let me go. I just want to go home." The fuel warning light blinked insistently. The engine began to sputter slightly, the first sign of running dry. James's vision was blurring, whether from exhaustion or tears or something else, he couldn't tell. The group of drivers had grown to 100 or more, filling the parking lot, all of them watching, waiting for the inevitable moment when his truck would coast to a stop. The engine coughed. The power steering began to fade. James could barely see through his tears. And then, impossibly, he saw something ahead that hadn't been there before. A break in the darkness, a gap in the surrounding void, and through it the faint reflection of highway lane markers. With the last of his momentum, James aimed his truck toward that gap. The engine died, the power steering went completely, and the truck coasted on its last energy toward what might have been a hallway, or might have been nothing at all. The truck rolled through the gap, and suddenly James was on I-15 again, the real I-15, with its rough pavement and mile markers and the blessed normalcy of empty Montana highway. His truck coasted to a stop on the shoulder, completely out of fuel, the engine dead. James sat in the silent cab, crying, shaking, barely able to process what had just happened. He looked in his mirrors, expecting to see the truck stop behind him, but there was only darkness and empty highway. The Mountain West Travel Plaza had vanished completely, or had never existed at all. He used his emergency satellite phone, something he'd always carried but never thought he'd need to use, to call for help. A tow truck arrived an hour later, finding James sitting on his truck's running board, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. "You okay, buddy?" the tow truck driver asked. "What happened?" "Ran out of fuel," James said, which was true enough. "Way out here? Didn't you see the fuel stop back about 20 miles? "What fuel stop?" "There's a truck stop back there, just off the highway. Big place, can't miss it." James shook his head. "There's nothing back there." The tow truck driver looked concerned. "You sure you're okay? Maybe you should see a doctor." James let the man tow his truck to Idaho Falls, where he refueled, filed his incident report, and continued his delivery to Salt Lake City. He completed the run, delivered the steel beams, and drove back to Billings. Then he sold his truck, terminated his commercial driver's license, and took a job at a warehouse loading dock. He told people he'd developed a medical condition that made long-haul driving unsafe. He told his family he wanted to stop traveling, to be home more consistently. He never told anyone about the Mountain West Travel Plaza, about the blank-faced drivers, about the parking lot that had no exit, about the voices calling his name through the CB static. He never told anyone that sometimes, late at night, he would wake up in a cold sweat, hearing those voices in his dreams, feeling the steering wheel in his hands, seeing the low fuel warning light blinking. Knowing that somewhere out there in the darkness between towns, that truck stop still existed, waiting for another driver to see its lights and think they'd found salvation when they'd actually found something much, much worse. Story 4. The Road That Looped. Sandra Mitchell was 29 years old and relatively new to professional trucking, having gotten her CDL just 4 years earlier. What she lacked in experience, she made up for with attention to detail, careful route planning, and an almost obsessive adherence to safety protocols. She specialized in regional deliveries across the Pacific Northwest, running loads between Seattle, Portland, Spokane, and Boise in a well-maintained Freightliner Cascadia she'd purchased used, but kept in impeccable condition. On a September night in 2022, Sandra was hauling a load of electronics from a warehouse outside Seattle to a distribution center in Boise. The route was straightforward, I-90 east across Washington, passing through Spokane, then transitioning to I-84 and I-84 business into Boise. Total distance was about 500 miles, which meant approximately 8 hours of driving with stops for fuel and rest breaks. Sandra had departed Seattle at 7 p.m., planning to drive through the night and arrive in Boise by dawn. The weather was perfect. Clear skies with temperatures in the comfortable mid-60s. Traffic was light once she got past the Bellevue area, and by the time she crossed the Cascade Mountains, she was making excellent time. By 11 p.m., Sandra was approaching the Idaho border, having crossed through Spokane without incident. Her GPS showed her about 2 hours from Boise, right on schedule. She just passed the town of Coeur d'Alene when she noticed her fuel gauge was at about a third of a tank. Not critical, but she preferred to keep her tank above a quarter for safety, so she decided to stop at the next available station. According to her GPS, there was a truck stop coming up in about 15 miles just off the highway near a small town called Post Falls. Sandra had stopped there before, a decent facility with reasonable prices and clean restrooms. She settled into her seat, adjusted her cruise control, and prepared for the routine fuel stop. The exit came up exactly where expected, Exit 7, clearly marked. Sandra took the off-ramp, following the signs that directed her toward the truck stop. The access road was familiar, a 2-lane route that curved through a lightly wooded area before opening up to where the truck stop should be visible. But as Sandra rounded the curve, she frowned. Something was different. The truck stop was there, but it looked wrong. The building seemed older, more worn than she remembered from her last visit 2 months ago. The parking lot had fewer vehicles, maybe only 3 or 4 trucks instead of the usual dozen or more. And the lighting was dimmer, several of the floodlights apparently out or malfunctioning. Sandra pulled up to one of the fuel pumps and shut off her engine. Maybe the place was under new management, or maybe they were having financial difficulties and couldn't maintain the property as well. It happened. She climbed down from her cab, the night air cool and pleasant, and began fueling her truck. As the diesel flowed, Sandra looked around more carefully. The other trucks in the lot were all older models, which was unusual but not unheard of. Many independent owner-operators kept older trucks running well past what most commercial fleets would consider their useful life. But what struck her as odd was how similar they all were. Not the same make or model, but they all had the same aged, worn appearance, the same dulled chrome, the same faded paint. She finished fueling and walked into the building to pay. The interior was oddly quiet, with only one clerk behind the counter, a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes. Sandra paid for her fuel, grabbed a bottle of water and some snacks, and headed back out. As she walked to her truck, Sandra noticed something strange. One of the parked trucks, a Kenworth that had been there when she'd arrived, was pulling out. She watched it drive toward the exit, then accelerate onto the access road that led back to the highway. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. Sandra climbed into her cab, started her engine, and prepared to leave as well. She put her truck in gear, navigated out of the parking lot, and followed the same access road toward the highway entrance. The road curved through the wooded area, exactly as it had when she'd exited the highway. But as she approached where the on-ramp should be, Sandra felt a jolt of confusion. Instead of merging back onto I-90, she found herself approaching the truck stop again. The same building, the same parking lot, the same dimly lit facility she'd just left. Sandra stopped her truck, her mind trying to process what she was seeing. This didn't make sense. She'd followed the access road away from the truck stop toward the highway. The road had only gone in one direction. There hadn't been any turnoffs or intersections. So how had she ended up back at the truck stop? She checked her GPS, which showed her position clearly at the truck stop near Post Falls. The map showed the access road leading from the truck stop to I-90, a simple straight connection. But that's not what had just happened. Sandra drove around the truck stop's parking lot looking for a different exit, a different route back to the highway. But there was only one way in and out, the same access road she'd taken to arrive and had attempted to take to leave. She tried again, driving carefully, paying close attention to every turn and curve. The access road led away from the truck stop, curved through the wooded area, and emerged at what should have been the highway entrance. But instead, Sandra found herself once again approaching the truck stop, seeing the same building from the same angle, as if she'd completed a circle despite the fact that the road had never turned back on itself. "What the hell?" Sandra said aloud. She stopped her truck in the middle of the access road, put on her hazard lights, and climbed down. Maybe there was something wrong with her spatial perception, or maybe she was more tired than she'd realized and was making navigation errors. She walked along the access road, following its path with her flashlight, looking for the point where it should connect to the highway. The road was straight, or nearly so, with only a gentle curve. There were trees on both sides, typical Pacific Northwest pine forest. The pavement was in reasonable condition, with standard yellow center line and white edge lines. Everything looked normal except for the fact that when Sandra walked about a quarter mile in what should have been the direction away from the truck stop, she found herself approaching the truck stop from the opposite side. The road formed a loop. It went from the truck stop, curved through the woods, and came back to the truck stop from a different angle. There was no connection to the highway at all. No on-ramp, no intersection, nothing. The access road was a closed circuit that led nowhere but back to where it started. Sandra's heart began to race. This was impossible. She'd taken exit 7 off I-90. She'd driven down an off-ramp from the highway to get to this truck stop. That meant there had to be a connection back to the highway. Roads didn't just form closed loops for no reason. There had to be an entrance and an exit, a connection to the larger road network. She walked back to her truck and tried her cell phone. No signal. She tried the CB radio, calling out on channel 19. "This is Sandra Mitchell. I'm at a truck stop near Post Falls, Idaho, and I'm having some kind of navigation problem. Can anyone hear me?" Static was her only answer. She tried her company's tracking system, but it showed an error, unable to update her location. She tried to call her dispatcher using her phone, but despite showing no cellular signal, the call seemed to connect. It rang once, twice, then someone answered. "Hello?" a woman's voice said. "Hi, this is Sandra Mitchell, driver for Pacific Northwest Freight. I'm having an emergency situation and need assistance." There was a pause, then the voice said, "I'm sorry, there's no one here by that name." "What?" "No, I'm Sandra Mitchell. I'm one of your drivers. I need to speak to dispatch." "I'm sorry," the voice repeated, sounding confused. "This is Pacific Northwest Freight, but we don't have any driver named Sandra Mitchell in our system." "That's impossible. I've been driving for you for 4 years. My employee ID is 2874. I'm hauling load number C-Boy 0912 right now." Another pause. "Ma'am, I don't know what's going on, but I've been working dispatch here for 10 years and I've never heard your name, and we don't have any load with that number. Check your records. Check my payroll information. Check anything." "I'm looking right now," the voice said, sounding genuinely concerned. "There's no record of you in our system at all. No employment history, no payroll, no assigned loads. Are you sure you're calling the right company?" Sandra ended the call, her hands shaking. She tried calling her emergency contact, her brother in Seattle. The call connected and he answered. "Hello? David, it's Sandra. I need help." "Who is this?" "It's Sandra, your sister. Something crazy is happening and I need you to—" "I don't have a sister," David's voice said, now sounding irritated. "I think you have the wrong number." "David, it's me. Sandra. We grew up in Tacoma. Mom and Dad are in Olympia. You work at Microsoft. You have 2 kids, Emily and Jason. You can't have forgotten me." "Lady, I don't know who you are, but this is harassment. Don't call this number again." The call disconnected. Sandra stood in the middle of the access road, her entire reality crumbling around her. The company she worked for had no record of her. Her brother claimed not to know her. She was trapped in a loop of road that led nowhere, unable to return to the highway, unable to escape. She walked back to the truck stop, her mind reeling. Inside, the same clerk was behind the counter, looking exactly as he had before. Sandra approached him, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Excuse me, I'm having trouble finding my way back to the highway. Can you give me directions?" The clerk looked at her with those tired eyes. "Highway's right where it always is. Just take the access road." "I tried that. The road just loops back here. There's no connection to the highway." "That's not possible. Everyone gets back to the highway." "Well, I can't. The road is a closed loop. There's no exit." The clerk's expression didn't change. "Everyone gets back to the highway," he repeated in exactly the same tone. Sandra looked around the store, noticing details she'd missed before. The products on the shelves were all normal brands, but they were older packaging designs, some from years or even decades ago. The calendar on the wall showed September 2022, which was correct, but the calendar itself looked old. The paper yellowed, the corners curled. "How long have you worked here?" Sandra asked the clerk. "Long time," he replied. "How long exactly?" "Long time." She realized she wasn't going to get useful information from him. Sandra went back outside and approached one of the other trucks in the parking lot, an old Peterbilt 379. She knocked on the cab door. After a moment, the door opened, and a man in his 50s peered down at her. He had the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades on the road. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm having trouble finding my way back to the highway." "Have you had any problems with the access road?" The man's expression became guarded. "You new here?" "New to what?" "I just stopped for fuel. I'm trying to get back to I-90. "You can't," the man said simply. "What do you mean I can't?" "The road loops. You arrive, but you don't leave. You're stuck here, same as the rest of us." Sandra felt ice water flow through her veins. "How long have you been here?" "Not sure anymore. Time gets funny. Could be months, could be years. I stopped keeping track." "That's impossible. You'd run out of supplies, fuel, food. How are you surviving?" The man shrugged. "We just are. The truck stop always has what we need. We sleep in our cabs, we eat from the store, we wait." "Wait for what?" "For whatever comes next, or for nothing. Doesn't really matter." Sandra backed away from the truck, horror and disbelief fighting for dominance in her mind. She ran to another parked truck and pounded on the door. A woman opened it, looking haggard and defeated. "How long have you been here?" Sandra demanded. "I don't know. 3 years? 4? The days all run together." "Why haven't you tried to escape? Why haven't you walked out through the woods?" "Some of us tried that. The woods don't lead anywhere. You walk for hours and you end up back at the truck stop. Everything loops back here. Everything leads back to the same place." Sandra ran from truck to truck, finding drivers who'd been trapped for months or years, all of them resigned to their fate, all of them living in an endless present at a truck stop that existed in a closed pocket of space from which there was no escape. She refused to accept this. Sandra got back in her truck, started the engine, and drove toward the tree line, off the road directly into the forest. She plowed through underbrush, dodging between trees, her truck lurching over uneven ground. She drove for what felt like an hour, pushing deeper and deeper into the woods, determined to break free by sheer force of will and determination. But eventually the trees opened up and Sandra found herself driving across the truck stop's parking lot, approaching the building from yet another angle. She'd traveled in a straight line through the forest, but somehow had ended up exactly where she'd started. Sandra stopped her truck, turned off the engine, and screamed. She screamed until her voice was raw, pounding on the steering wheel, crying tears of frustration and terror. When she finally exhausted herself, she sat in silence, trying to think, trying to find some solution, some escape route that the others had missed. She looked at her cargo manifest. She was carrying a load of electronics worth over $300,000. It was supposed to be delivered to Boise by dawn. The company was expecting it. Customers were waiting for it. She had responsibilities, obligations, a schedule to keep. But none of that mattered if she couldn't leave this place. Sandra tried everything over the next several hours. She tried driving the access road at different speeds. She tried driving it backward. She tried driving with her eyes closed, hoping that somehow not observing the loop would allow her to break free of it. She tried walking, running, even crawling. Nothing worked. Every path led back to the truck stop. Every route formed a closed circuit. Every attempt at escape ended exactly where it began. As dawn approached, or what felt like dawn, though the sky remained at the same perpetual pre-sunrise dimness, Sandra sat on her truck's running board, defeated and exhausted. The other drivers moved around the facility like ghosts, going through the motions of living without any apparent purpose or hope. Sandra thought about her life before this night, her apartment in Seattle, her boyfriend of 2 years, her plans to save up money to buy a house, her dream of eventually starting her own trucking company. All of it seemed impossibly distant now, as if it had happened to someone else, or had never happened at all. She thought about the phone calls, how her company and her brother had claimed not to know her. Had she been erased from reality somehow? Had she slipped into a parallel dimension where she'd never existed? Or was this something else, some kind of limbo or purgatory where lost travelers ended up? One of the long-trapped drivers, a man named Robert who claimed he'd been stuck here for 5 years, sat down next to her. "You're in the anger stage," he said. "Most people go through the same process. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. You'll get to acceptance eventually, we all do." "I'm not accepting this," Sandra said flatly. "There has to be a way out. If there is, none of us have found it, and believe me, we've tried everything." But Sandra wasn't ready to give up. She spent the next period of time, she couldn't tell if it was days or weeks because the sky never changed, studying the truck stop and its surroundings obsessively. She mapped the access road, measuring its exact length and curve. She mapped the forest, marking trees, looking for any variation or anomaly. She talked to every trapped driver, gathering information about their experiences, looking for patterns or clues. And then she found something. In the very center of the truck stop's parking lot, there was a manhole cover. She'd seen it dozens of times, but had never paid it any attention. But now, examining it closely, she noticed something strange. The cover had a date stamped on it, September 18th, 2022. That was 3 days ago, the day before she'd stopped at this place. Sandra found a tire iron and pried the manhole cover open. Below was a standard storm drainage system, a concrete tunnel about 4 feet in diameter, dark and damp. She grabbed her flashlight and lowered herself into the tunnel. The tunnel extended in 2 directions. Sandra picked one and started crawling. The space was tight, claustrophobic, filled with the smell of old water and mold. She crawled for what felt like an hour, her flashlight beam showing nothing but endless concrete tunnel ahead. And then suddenly the tunnel opened up into a larger space. Sandra emerged in what appeared to be a subway station, but wrong. The architecture was right, the platform and tracks were right, but there were no signs, no advertisements, no indication of what station this was or what line it served. And there was no one else there. The station was completely empty, silent except for the distant sound of water dripping. Sandra climbed onto the platform and explored. She found stairs leading upward and she climbed them, emerging onto a city street. But it wasn't a real city. The buildings were present, skyscrapers and storefronts and traffic lights, but they were empty shells, facades with nothing behind them. The streets had no vehicles. The windows showed no lights. It was a movie set version of a city, realistic from a distance but revealed as hollow and fake upon close inspection. Sandra walked through this false city for hours, searching for some sign of real life, some connection to the actual world. But there was nothing. Just empty buildings, empty streets, and that same eternal pre-dawn dimness. Eventually, she found herself back at the storm drain entrance. She'd walked in a straight line away from it, but somehow her path had curved back. Another loop, another closed circuit. She climbed back down into the tunnel and crawled back the way she'd come. When she emerged from the manhole at the truck stop, the other drivers were standing around the opening watching her. Robert helped pull her out. "You found the city," he said. It wasn't a question. "You knew about it?" "We all know about it. Some of us have found other places too. A suburban neighborhood with no people, a shopping mall that goes on forever, a forest path that loops back on itself. They're all connected to this place, but they're all the same. Empty loops that lead nowhere." Sandra sat on the pavement, filthy from the storm drain, exhausted from her exploration, and finally let herself feel the full weight of despair. She was trapped not just in a location, but in a space that existed outside of normal reality. A pocket dimension or folded geography that had no connection to the real world. Weeks passed, or what felt like weeks. Sandra went through all the stages Robert had predicted. She raged against her captivity. She bargained with whatever force had created this place, promising anything if she could just leave. She sank into depression, spending days sitting motionless in her truck cab. And finally, she began to accept. She fell into a routine like the other trapped drivers. She ate from the truck stop store, though the food never ran out and the clerk never seemed to restock. She slept in her truck. She talked to the other drivers, sharing stories about their lives before, about the families and friends they'd left behind. But Sandra never quite reached full acceptance. Some part of her kept fighting, kept looking for answers, kept believing that there had to be a way out. She studied the other drivers, looking for what they had in common. They were all professional truckers. They'd all stopped at this truck stop for routine reasons. They'd all taken the same exit off I-90, and they'd all been alone. Sandra remembered suddenly the Kenworth she'd seen leaving when she'd first arrived. It had been pulling out of the parking lot, heading for the access road. She'd lost track of it in her own navigation confusion, but she didn't remember seeing it come back. What if it had escaped? What if it hadn't been trapped by the loop? She asked the other drivers, "When you arrived here, were any of you traveling with another truck, like in a convoy or with a partner?" They all shook their heads. Everyone had been traveling alone, solo drivers on individual runs. Sandra had an idea. It was insane, but everything about this situation was insane, so maybe insanity was the correct response. She approached Robert. "I need you to drive with me," she said. "I need another truck traveling with mine." "It won't work," Robert said. "We've tried everything." "Have you tried this?" He thought about it, then slowly shook his head. "No, no one's thought of that. We've all been focused on escaping individually." Sandra convinced Robert and another driver, a woman named Maria, to form a convoy. They prepared their trucks, checking fuel and systems. Then in formation, they drove out of the parking lot onto the access road. Sandra led, Robert followed, Maria brought up the rear. They drove along the road, through the curve, toward where the loop should bring them back to the truck stop. Sandra held her breath, hoping, praying. The curve came, the trees parted, and ahead, the highway. Real I-90 with real traffic, cars and trucks moving at highway speeds, their headlights cutting through normal nighttime darkness. Not the eternal pre-dawn dimness of the trapped place, but real dark with real vehicles creating real light. Sandra almost cried with relief. She led the convoy onto the highway, merging into traffic, feeling the familiar vibration of real pavement under her wheels. She looked in her mirrors and saw Robert and Maria following, both of them also successfully on the highway. They drove in convoy for 20 miles before Sandra pulled over at a real rest stop, one she recognized, that her GPS confirmed was at the correct location. All three drivers climbed down from their trucks and just stood there, breathing real air, seeing real stars, crying and laughing and hugging each other. "We did it," Maria kept saying. "We actually did it." Sandra checked her phone. It showed full signal. The date was September 23, 2022. She'd lost only one day, though it had felt like weeks. She called her dispatcher, who answered immediately and confirmed that yes, Sandra Mitchell was an employee, and yes, she was late for her delivery, and was everything okay? Everything was okay. Everything was finally okay. Sandra completed her delivery to Boise 6 hours late but otherwise incident-free. Robert and Maria completed their own runs, returning to their families and lives. The three of them stayed in contact, the only people in the world who truly understood what they'd experienced and what they'd escaped from. Sandra continued driving, though she never took exit 7 near Post Falls ever again. She warned other drivers about it when she could, though most dismissed her warnings as urban legends or hallucinations. But some listened, and some avoided that exit, and Sandra hoped that meant fewer people would fall into that terrible loop, that pocket of impossible geography where the road led nowhere and time stood still. And sometimes late at night, Sandra would think about the truck stop and wonder if it was still there, still trapping solo drivers who made the mistake of stopping for fuel. She wondered if new drivers had joined the population of the trapped, standing around the parking lot in that eternal pre-dawn dimness, waiting for an escape that would never come unless someone arrived to help them break free. Just as Sandra had needed Robert and Maria to escape with her, proving that some prisons can only be broken through the power of human connection and the refusal to face darkness alone. Story 5. The Voice on the Radio. Timothy Okafor was 56 years old and had been driving trucks since he was 23. Over those 33 years, he'd survived 2 accidents, 1 attempted hijacking, 3 economic recessions, and countless storms, breakdowns, and close calls. He was a veteran of the highways, someone who'd seen almost everything the road had to offer, and he prided himself on his unflappable demeanor and practical approach to every situation. Timothy specialized in long-distance hauls across the American South, running loads between Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. He knew every major highway, every truck stop, every shortcut and alternate route. He'd driven through hurricanes, tornadoes, and ice storms. He'd delivered cargo through post-disaster zones and civil unrest. Nothing rattled Timothy. He was the driver companies called when they needed someone absolutely reliable, someone who would complete the delivery no matter what obstacles appeared. On a humid August night in 2021, Timothy was hauling a load of industrial chemicals from Houston, Texas, to a manufacturing facility outside Mobile, Alabama. The cargo was moderately hazardous, requiring special licensing and careful driving, but nothing Timothy hadn't handled hundreds of times before. He'd departed Houston at 6 p.m., planning to drive through the night and arrive in Mobile by mid-morning. By midnight, Timothy was deep into Louisiana, cruising along I-10 east through the swamps and bayous that characterized this region. Traffic was sparse, just the occasional vehicle passing in the opposite direction. The night was clear, with a bright moon that turned the water in the swamps into sheets of silver. Timothy had his CB radio on, tuned to Channel 19, though there wasn't much chatter this late at night in this remote area. His Volvo VNL 860 was running perfectly, the powerful engine maintaining a steady 70 miles per hour. Timothy sipped coffee from his thermos, listened to a blues station on his regular radio, and felt the comfortable rhythm of a routine haul. Nothing about this night suggested that anything unusual was going to happen. Around 1 a.m., as Timothy was passing through a particularly isolated stretch of highway with swamp on both sides, his CB radio crackled with a sudden transmission. The voice that came through was male, sounding urgent and distressed. "Help, if anyone, hear me now, please help." Timothy immediately grabbed his CB microphone. "This is Timothy Okafor southbound on I-10 near mile marker 112. I copy your transmission. What's your location and what's your emergency?" Static answered him for several seconds, then the voice came through again. "Truck broke down. Side of the road, I-10, eastbound, one don't know exact location." "Copy that, I'm eastbound myself. What's your vehicle description? I'll watch for you." "Kenworth, red cab, white trailer." "Got it, I'll keep my eyes open. Can you give me any landmarks?" "Exit numbers, anything that might help me locate you?" More static then. "Swamp on both sides. Bridge maybe half-mile back. Can't see any exits." Timothy knew this stretch of highway reasonably well. There were several areas that matched that description, but he'd be approaching them soon if he wasn't in them already. "All right, friend. I'm coming up on your approximate location. Keep your hazards on if you can. Make yourself visible. What's your name?" James Dupree." "Okay, James, hang tight. I'll find you." Timothy slowed down and began scanning the shoulder carefully. The highway was elevated in this section with swamp visible on both sides. Moonlight provided decent visibility and Timothy's headlights cut through the darkness. But he didn't see any stopped trucks. He continued for several miles, watching carefully, but saw no disabled vehicle. He keyed his CB again. "James, this is Timothy. I've been watching for you but haven't spotted your truck yet. Can you see any vehicles passing you?" The response came back immediately, which seemed odd given the previous delayed and static-filled transmissions. "No. No vehicles. You should be right here. Why can't you see me?" "I don't know, friend. Give me some more details. What exactly happened to your truck?" "Engine died. Just stopped. Pulled over. Tried to restart. Nothing." Timothy drove another 5 miles but still saw no stopped Kenworth. This was getting strange. He'd covered a significant distance, and if there really was a broken-down truck, he should have passed it by now. "James, I've traveled about 7 miles since first contact, and I haven't seen you." "Are you sure you're on I-10 eastbound?" Yes, I'm right here. Why can't you find me?" There was something in the voice now that Timothy didn't like, a quality that was hard to define but definitely present. It sounded wrong somehow, too flat or too desperate, or something else he couldn't quite identify. His years of experience were triggering warning alarms in his mind. "James, what company do you drive?" "For?" Silence, just static for a long moment, then "Independent. Owner-operator." "What's your cargo?" Another pause. "Machinery parts." "What's your truck's plate number?" The longest pause yet, then "Why are you asking these questions? I need help." "Why won't you help me?" Timothy's grip tightened on the CB microphone. Something was very wrong here. In all his years of trucking, he'd helped dozens of stranded drivers, and they'd always been eager to provide identifying information, anything that would help locate them or verify their situation. This James Dupree was being evasive and getting agitated about perfectly reasonable questions. "James, I'm trying to help you, but I need to verify your situation. What's your DOT number?" "Forget the questions, just help me. Please, I've been here so long." "How long have you been broken down?" "So long, days, maybe weeks, I can't remember. Please help me." Timothy made a decision. He keyed the CB to Channel 9, the emergency channel, and attempted to contact authorities. "This is Timothy Okafor on I-10 eastbound near mile marker 119. I've got a possible stranded trucker situation that doesn't feel right. Requesting information on any reported disabled vehicles in this area." No response came on Channel 9, which was unusual. That channel was typically monitored by highway patrol and emergency services. Timothy switched back to 19 and immediately heard the voice again. "Why did you call them? You shouldn't have done that. I just needed help." The voice had changed. It was still male, still recognizably the same speaker, but the tone had shifted from desperate to something else. Something angry. "James, who are you really?" Timothy asked. "I'm James Dupree. I'm broken down on I-10. You drove right past me. You left me here. I didn't see any truck. You didn't look hard enough. You didn't care enough. None of you ever care enough." The voice was definitely angry now, with an undertone of something that might have been accusation or resentment. Timothy felt his skin prickling, his instincts screaming at him that he was dealing with something far outside normal experience. "I'm going to sign off now," Timothy said, trying to keep his voice calm and professional. "No, don't leave. Don't leave me here alone. I've been alone for so long. Please don't leave me." The voice had shifted again back to desperation, but now it sounded pleading, almost childlike. Timothy's hand hovered over the CB radio's power switch. Part of him wanted to just turn it off, to cut off this disturbing communication. But another part, the part that had helped countless drivers over his long career, hesitated. "If you're really a stranded trucker, give me verifiable information. Tell me something concrete that I can use to help you. I died here in 1987. My truck went off the road into the swamp. I drowned. I've been calling for help ever since, but no one ever stops. No one ever helps. They all just drive past." Timothy's blood went cold. The voice was matter-of-fact now, delivering this impossible information in a flat, emotionless tone. "This isn't funny," Timothy said, though he knew in his gut that no one was joking. "Not trying to be funny, trying to be found, trying to be saved, trying to be free, but I'm trapped here, in the water, in the dark, calling forever, and no one answers." Timothy switched off the CB radio with a decisive motion. The sudden silence in the cab was almost shocking after the disturbing conversation. He focused on driving, on maintaining his speed, on covering distance and getting away from this section of highway as quickly as possible. But then the regular radio, which had been playing blues music from a station out of Baton Rouge, changed. The music faded, replaced by static, and through the static came the voice again. "Why did you turn off the CB? I was talking to you. That's rude. Very rude." Timothy punched the radio's power button, shutting it off. But the voice continued, now coming from the truck's speakers without any apparent source. No radio signal, no technological explanation. "You can't shut me out. I'm here. I'm always here. Everyone who drives this stretch, I talk to them. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't, but I keep trying. I keep calling." "Leave me alone," Timothy said firmly. "I'm so lonely. It's so dark down here. The water is cold, so cold. I just want someone to find me, to pull me out, to give me peace." Timothy's dashboard display flickered, the digital readouts showing random numbers and symbols instead of speed and fuel information. His headlights dimmed briefly, then brightened to an almost painful intensity, then returned to normal. The truck itself seemed to shudder, though the road was smooth and the engine was running fine. "You're different. You're listening. Most people just ignore me. But you're actually listening. Maybe you can help me. Maybe you can be the one." "I can't help you," Timothy said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I don't know how. My truck is in the swamp. Coordinates 3347 north, 9112 west, about 100 yards off the highway. Underwater. It's been there for 34 years. If someone could find it, could recover me, maybe I could rest." Timothy's hands were shaking now, but he managed to pull out his phone and enter the coordinates into a notes app, writing them down despite his terror. "I'll report this," he said. "I'll tell authorities about these coordinates, but I can't do anything more than that. That's all I need. Someone to report it. Someone to try. I've been calling for so long. And finally someone listened. Thank you. Thank you." The voice was fading now, becoming more distant, as if receding into a great depth. "Coordinates 3347 north, 9112 west. Remember. Please remember. Don't let me be forgotten again." Then silence. Real silence. The speakers went dead. The dashboard display returned to normal, and the truck's systems all stabilized. Timothy drove in shocked silence for another 20 miles before pulling into a rest area, his entire body shaking, his mind reeling from what had just occurred. He sat in his truck for an hour, trying to process the experience. Every rational part of his brain insisted it had been a prank or a hallucination or a technology malfunction that had created the illusion of a conversation with something impossible. But his gut, honed by 3 decades of road experience, knew the truth. He'd communicated with something beyond normal explanation, something that had been trapped and calling for help for over 30 years. Timothy eventually composed himself enough to continue driving. He completed his delivery to Mobile, unloaded the chemicals, and filed his routine paperwork. But then, instead of immediately taking his next load, he drove to a Louisiana State Police station and asked to speak to someone about cold cases. The officer he spoke to was skeptical but professional. When Timothy relayed the coordinates and the story of a truck crash from 1987, the officer agreed to check historical records. 2 days later, Timothy received a call. A trucker named James Dupree had indeed been reported missing in August 1987 somewhere along I-10 in Louisiana. His truck had never been found, and the case had eventually gone cold. Using Timothy's coordinates, a search and recovery team explored the swamp area. They found exactly where the voice had said, the rusted remains of a Kenworth truck submerged in murky water approximately 100 yards from the highway. Inside the cab, they recovered human remains that were later identified through dental records as James Dupree. The recovery made local news, a human interest story about a long-missing trucker finally found and returned to his family for proper burial. Timothy was mentioned briefly as a passing truck driver who provided crucial information. But he declined all interview requests and kept the details of his communication with James Dupree to himself. The night after James's remains were recovered, Timothy was driving through a different part of Louisiana when his CB radio crackled to life on its own. He tensed, expecting the voice to return. Instead, there was just a brief transmission, clear and free of static. "Thank you." Then silence. The CB returned to normal background chatter, and James Dupree never contacted Timothy again. Timothy continued driving for several more years before retiring at age 60. He never spoke publicly about his experience, though he did share the story with a few trusted friends and family members. Some believed him. Others thought he'd experienced some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Timothy didn't particularly care what others believed. He knew what had happened, knew he'd been contacted by something that shouldn't have been able to contact anyone, and knew he'd helped bring peace to a spirit that had been trapped and calling for help for over 3 decades. But the experience changed him. Timothy became more attentive to his CB radio, listening carefully to transmissions, especially late at night in isolated areas. He never again encountered anything like James Dupree, but he always wondered if there were others out there. Other trapped souls calling across the vast distances of highway, trying desperately to be heard, to be found, to be given the peace of acknowledgement and recovery. And sometimes in the darkest hours of night, driving through the most remote stretches of highway, Timothy would key his CB and say simply, "This is Timothy. If anyone needs help, I'm listening." Just in case someone or something needed to hear those words, needed to know that someone was paying attention, that someone cared enough to listen to voices that came from places beyond the living world. Story 6. The Twin Highway. Rebecca Hartwell was 35 years old and had been driving professionally for 9 years, having switched careers from accounting to trucking after a messy divorce left her wanting a complete change in her life. She found unexpected fulfillment in the independence and solitude of long-haul trucking and had built a successful career running high-value cargo across the western states. On the October night in 2023, Rebecca was hauling a shipment of computer servers from San Jose, California, to a data center outside Denver, Colorado. The cargo was valued at over $2 million and required careful handling and precise delivery timing. Rebecca had been chosen for this run specifically because of her perfect delivery record and reputation for reliability. She'd departed San Jose at 5 p.m., taking I-580 to I-5, then transitioning to I-80 East. The route would take her through Nevada and Utah before entering Colorado. Total distance was about 1,000 miles, which meant approximately 16 hours of driving with mandated rest breaks. She planned to drive through the night, take a break in the early morning, then complete the delivery by evening the following day. By 11 p.m., Rebecca was crossing Nevada on I-80, passing through the vast empty spaces between Reno and Elko. This was some of the loneliest highway in America. Hours of driving through darkness with only the occasional distant light of a ranch or small town breaking the emptiness. Rebecca didn't mind. She found the solitude peaceful, almost meditative. Her Freightliner Cascadia was equipped with all the latest technology: GPS navigation, satellite tracking, advanced collision avoidance systems, and a comprehensive dashboard that displayed every aspect of the truck's performance. Everything was running perfectly, all systems green, on schedule for an on-time delivery. Around midnight, as Rebecca was passing through a particularly desolate stretch with no visible lights or landmarks in any direction, she noticed something odd. Her GPS was showing two versions of I-80 parallel lines on the map where there should only be one. She tapped the screen, assuming it was a display glitch, but the two lines remained. Rebecca looked at the actual highway ahead of her. It appeared normal, a standard 4-lane interstate with proper markings and signage. But then as she watched, the highway seemed to shimmer slightly, and for just a moment she thought she saw it diverge, splitting into two separate roads that ran side by side before converging back together. She blinked hard, wondering if she was experiencing the early stages of fatigue. But no, she felt alert and well-rested, and her truck's fatigue monitoring system showed green, indicating no signs of impaired driving. The highway shimmered again, and this time the divergence lasted longer. Rebecca could clearly see two parallel highways, identical in every way, running alongside each other about 50 yards apart. Her truck was on the right-hand highway, and she could see no traffic on the left-hand one. Then the two highways converged again, merging back into a single road. Rebecca gripped her steering wheel tighter, her mind racing. Was this some kind of optical illusion? A mirage created by atmospheric conditions? But she'd never heard of mirages that created duplicate highways. Her GPS was now clearly showing the two parallel routes, labeling them both as I-80 East, but showing them as separate roads. One was marked with her current position, the blue dot indicating her truck. The other showed no traffic markers at all. The highway diverged again, and this time Rebecca noticed something that made her stomach tighten. On the left-hand highway, the parallel version, there was a truck. It appeared to be the same make and model as her own Freightliner, with a similar white cab and trailer. And it was traveling at exactly the same speed she was, maintaining perfect parallel position. Rebecca accelerated slightly, and the truck on the parallel highway accelerated as well, matching her speed exactly. She slowed down, and it slowed in perfect synchronization. She was being mirrored by a truck on a highway that shouldn't exist, driven by someone she couldn't see clearly at this distance in the darkness. The two highways converged again, and when they did, the other truck vanished. Rebecca was alone on a single highway that looked completely normal. Her GPS showed only one I-80 again. She grabbed her CB radio. "This is Rebecca Hartwell eastbound on I-80 in Nevada. Is anyone else seeing weird highway conditions out here? Anyone else experiencing strange visual phenomena?" Static answered her. She tried again on several channels but got no response. Either no one was in range or no one was answering. The highway diverged again and the parallel highway reappeared along with the mirror truck. Rebecca decided to try something. She activated her headlights' high beams and flashed them 3 times, a standard trucker signal. The truck on the parallel highway immediately flashed its high beams 3 times in response. Someone was driving that truck, someone who could see her and was responding to her signals. But who and how were they on a highway that didn't exist? Rebecca made a decision. At the next divergence, she was going to try to change highways, to cross over to the parallel version and see if she could make contact with the other driver. Maybe this was some kind of new road construction that her GPS hadn't been updated to reflect properly. Maybe there was a rational explanation. The highways converged and then diverged again. This time, Rebecca steered left, trying to cross the space between the two roads. But as she did, the highway shimmered and converged back to one, forcing her back onto the single road. The parallel version had disappeared before she could reach it. She tried several more times over the next 30 miles, but every time she attempted to cross to the parallel highway, it would vanish before she could get there. It was as if the two versions of the road existed in separate states of reality that couldn't be physically connected, despite being visible to each other. Rebecca's sophisticated dashboard suddenly displayed an alert. "Dimensional barrier detected. Parallel route inaccessible." She stared at the message in confusion. This wasn't a standard truck alert message. She'd never seen anything like it before. She didn't even know her truck's systems were capable of displaying such a message. "What the hell?" Rebecca said aloud. The message changed. "You are experiencing highway bifurcation. Maintain current route. Do not attempt to cross." "Who's controlling my dashboard?" Rebecca demanded, though she had no idea who or what might be answering. The message changed again. "Autonomous guidance system activated. Trust the system. Continue on current highway." Rebecca had never heard of an autonomous guidance system in her truck. She'd purchased this Freightliner new, and while it had advanced features, nothing in the specifications had mentioned anything like what she was seeing now. She tried to access the truck's settings menu to disable whatever system was displaying these messages, but the controls were locked, not responding to her inputs. The highway diverged again, and Rebecca looked at the parallel highway with increasing dread. The mirror truck was still there, but now she could see it more clearly in a flash of moonlight. It was identical to her truck, down to the company logos on the trailer, down to the specific wear patterns on the chrome, down to a small dent on the left fender that Rebecca had acquired 2 months ago. It wasn't just a similar truck. It was her exact truck, perfect mirror image. And if that was true, then the driver... Rebecca looked harder, trying to see into the other truck's cab. The moonlight illuminated it for just a moment, and Rebecca saw the driver. It was a woman with Rebecca's hair, Rebecca's build, wearing the same jacket Rebecca was wearing. The driver on the parallel highway was Rebecca herself. "No," Rebecca whispered. "No, that's not possible." But she could see it clearly now. The other truck was being driven by what appeared to be an exact duplicate of herself, moving in perfect synchronization with her own movements. When Rebecca turned her head, the parallel driver turned her head. When Rebecca adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, the parallel driver made the same adjustment. The dashboard displayed another message. You are observing quantum highway splitting. Both versions are real. Both versions are you. Rebecca felt panic rising in her chest. This couldn't be real. This had to be a hallucination or a dream or a psychotic break. But everything felt entirely real. The truck was solid beneath her. The road was real. The controls responded normally. This wasn't a dream logic situation. This was reality, just a reality that made no sense. What happens if the highways don't converge? Rebecca asked the dashboard, not really expecting an answer. The message changed. If divergence becomes permanent, you will choose which highway to continue on. The other version of you will continue on the alternate highway. Both will be real. Both will reach Denver. But they will reach different versions of Denver. Different versions, what does that mean? Quantum branching creates parallel realities. Small differences accumulate. The two Denvers will be similar but not identical. The two yous will be the same person but will have experienced slightly different journeys. Rebecca's hands were shaking. She was being told that reality itself was splitting, that she was somehow dividing into two versions that would continue on parallel but separate paths. This was insane. This was impossible. But she was watching it happen in real time, seeing herself duplicated on a highway that existed alongside the one she was driving. How do I stop this? Rebecca demanded. You cannot stop quantum processes. You can only accept them. The split has already begun. Within approximately 1 hour, the divergence will become permanent. I don't accept this. I don't want to split. I want to stay as one person on one highway in one reality. That option no longer exists. The quantum wave function has collapsed into multiple states. You must choose which highway to remain on. The other version will continue independently. The two highways were staying diverged now, running parallel for longer and longer periods before briefly converging. And each time they diverged, the space between them seemed to grow slightly wider, as if reality was pulling them apart, forcing them into separate states. Rebecca could see the parallel version of herself more clearly now. The other Rebecca looked terrified, which made sense because she was terrified. They were sharing this experience, both of them confused and frightened, both of them trying to understand what was happening. On an impulse, Rebecca grabbed a piece of paper and a marker. She wrote in large letters, "Are you real?" and held it up to her window, angled so the parallel Rebecca could see it. The parallel Rebecca nodded emphatically, then held up her own sign that she'd apparently written at the same moment. Are you real? They were both real, both equally valid versions of the same person, experiencing the same impossible situation from slightly different perspectives. The dashboard message changed. You have 30 minutes until permanent divergence. At that time, you must choose North Highway or South Highway. One will lead to primary timeline. One will lead to secondary timeline. What's the difference? Minimal at first. A few small details. Over time, larger divergences will accumulate. Different opportunities, different relationships, different outcomes, both valid, both real, but different. Rebecca thought about her life, her career, her goals. She thought about the delivery she was making, the data center in Denver that was expecting these servers. She thought about her apartment, her friends, her aging parents. How could she choose to abandon one version of all that and step into a different version? What happens to the version of me on the highway I don't choose? She continues. She lives her life. She is real and valid. But you will diverge. You will become separate people. Sisters, in a sense. Same origin but different paths forward. The two highways were now running fully parallel, no longer converging at all. Rebecca could see the other highway clearly, could see her duplicate driving, could see the fear and confusion on her other self's face. They were about 50 yards apart, close enough to see each other clearly, but too far to communicate except through signs. The parallel Rebecca held up another sign. "Which one do we choose?" Rebecca shook her head helplessly. She had no idea. How could anyone make such a choice? The dashboard began a countdown. 20 minutes until lock, make your choice. Rebecca thought frantically. Was there any meaningful difference between the two highways? They looked identical. The landscape on both sides appeared the same. There was no obvious indicator of which led where. Then Rebecca noticed something. On the northern highway, the one she was currently driving, there was a mile marker visible in the distance. Mile 303. On the southern highway, where her duplicate was driving, the mile marker showed mile 304. They were offset by 1 mile despite appearing to be at the same position. One highway was slightly ahead of the other. One version of reality was 1 mile further along than the other version. 15 minutes until lock. Rebecca made a decision. She had always been someone who moved forward, who progressed, who didn't look back. If she had to choose between two realities, she would choose the one that was further ahead, even if only by a single mile. She steered left toward the center line of her highway and held up a sign to her duplicate. "I'm staying north. You go south." The duplicate Rebecca looked at her sign, nodded, and steered right on her highway, moving toward the outer edge, creating distance between them. They were making the choice together, coordinating their divergence. 10 minutes until lock. The space between the two highways began to widen perceptibly. What had been 50 yards was now 100, then 200, then a quarter mile. The two versions of I-80 were being pulled apart by forces Rebecca couldn't see or understand, each one moving toward its separate reality. Rebecca watched her duplicate recede into the distance, the other truck getting smaller and smaller. She felt an unexpected grief, as if she were watching a sister or close friend leave forever. In a sense, she was. That other Rebecca was her, was every bit as real and valid as she was. But they were diverging now, becoming separate people who would live separate lives. 5 minutes until lock. The parallel highway was barely visible now, a distant ribbon of pavement in the darkness. The other truck was just a tiny point of light, headlights that could have been any vehicle or no vehicle at all. 1 minute until lock. Rebecca wiped tears from her eyes and focused on the road ahead. Her highway, the northern version, continued straight and true. Her GPS showed her on I-80 exactly where she should be, no duplicate route anymore, just the single highway she'd chosen. Lock complete, divergence permanent. You are now on primary timeline. Alternate timeline has separated. Both continue. Both are real. The dashboard message faded, replaced by normal truck system displays. Everything returned to standard operation. Rebecca's controls were responsive again. The GPS showed a single route, and all the advanced warning systems that had detected the quantum bifurcation went silent. Rebecca drove in stunned silence for the next hour, her mind trying to process what had just occurred. She'd experienced reality splitting, had watched herself divide into two versions, had made a choice that determined which version of the world she would continue to inhabit. And somewhere, on a highway that ran parallel to this one but in a different quantum state, another Rebecca was driving the same truck with the same cargo, heading to a Denver that was almost but not quite identical to the Denver Rebecca was heading toward. She completed her delivery on schedule, the servers arriving without incident at the data center. The receiving technician signed off on the cargo, everything processed normally, and Rebecca was paid for a successful completion. But Rebecca couldn't stop thinking about the other version of herself, Did that Rebecca complete her delivery successfully too? Was she back in her apartment, living her life, thinking about the split? Were there now two Rebeccas in two similar but separate realities, both wondering about each other? Rebecca tried to research quantum highway phenomena, parallel realities and reality branching, but found nothing that matched her experience. Physicists talked about theoretical parallel universes, but not about highways that split and forced people to choose which version of reality to continue in. She considered reporting the experience, but to whom? The trucking company would think she'd had a breakdown. The authorities would question her mental state. The media would mock her. So Rebecca kept silent, continuing to drive, continuing to make deliveries, keeping her impossible experience to herself. But something had changed. Rebecca became obsessed with the idea that every choice, every decision, every moment potentially created branches in reality. If she took exit 47 instead of exit 48, did that create two versions of herself? If she ordered coffee instead of tea, did another Rebecca continue in a parallel timeline drinking tea? She began to see the world as a vast tree of possibilities, constantly branching, creating infinite variations of herself and everyone else. And she wondered if the quantum highway bifurcation had been a unique, one-time event, or if reality was constantly splitting in ways that people just didn't notice, because the branches usually diverged too far to see. 6 months after the incident, Rebecca was driving through Nevada again on I-80, approaching the same stretch of highway where the split had occurred. She watched carefully, wondering if it would happen again. And for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw a parallel highway shimmer into existence alongside her own. And on that parallel highway, for just a fraction of a second, she saw a truck that looked like hers. And the driver, briefly visible, looked like her but older, with gray in her hair that Rebecca didn't have yet. Then the vision vanished and Rebecca was alone on a single highway, driving through the Nevada darkness, wondering if she'd just seen her future self on a parallel timeline where time ran at a slightly different rate, or if her mind was playing tricks on her, or if reality itself was more fluid and malleable than anyone truly understood. Rebecca never experienced another quantum highway split, never again saw duplicate versions of herself or parallel roads. But she never forgot that October night when reality had divided, when she'd been forced to choose which version of herself to continue being, and when she'd learned that the universe might be far stranger and more complex than anyone dared to imagine, with highways that didn't just connect cities but connected different possible versions of the world itself.